All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar here today. This is a deep dive session on parallels RAS, and the idea here today is to walk through a few slides, and of course, I will be drilling down to the demo where we will be able to see RAS in more details, and I will focus in a few features that I think is quite a bit important for us to address today, especially the new ones related to SAML or even multi-tenancy. Probably in the previous session, you heard about RAS. It's an all-inclusive solution. We use uh, remote desktop services technology from Microsoft and as well VDIs. And the VDIs are focused on Windows 7 and Windows 10 operating systems. We have enterprise class features related to end-to-end load balancing, fault tolerance, built-in universal printing, which means you can use printing redirection to virtually any devices that you use. In the endpoint side, can be thin clients, can be Chromebooks, can be iPads or Macs or even Linux operating system side. We have auto scaling features, and the auto scaling is great for on-premise deployments, and as well if you're using Azure. Azure, we have the ability now to auto-scale RD session hosts and as well VDI instances. And the licensing is simple. We have a simplified license. You have one license that give you access to pretty much all features of remote application server. So when we talk about our architecture, here is just a few items here, like end users, of course, connecting from multiple locations or could be from multiple devices. And we have the first component here, we call it the publishing agent. I prefer to call them as controllers. And you can have one controller, two controllers, or sometimes three controllers. And the controller responsibility is to authenticate users, talk to Active Directory, talk to SAML, talk to the backend infrastructure, and make sure the components are ready and distributed appropriately. And if you're using hybrid cloud, you can have one controller on-premise and another controller on your cloud deployment. Could be Azure, could be AWS, Google, or other service providers. The second item to be highlighted here is called the secure client gateway. This is where the communication it's being tunneled, and which means from the end user to the backend. So it's pretty much a way to encapsulate our protocol, which we use our own protocol plus RDP to connect to the backend. And in this case, could be RD session host or VDI. So the user connects to a load balancer, can be our own load balancer, which is a Linux virtual appliance, talks to the gateway, we handshake the connection to the controller, your identity, what permissions you have, what you can access, and then establishes a connection to the session host. We have what we call smart load balancing is, depending the user load on the servers, the user might be connected to a different RD session hosts. And the same user can be using apps from different servers, but what we do as an option, we keep always the same user connected to the same RD session host. That actually helps to optimize Microsoft RDCals, for example. And more users connect, it will be distributing the load automatically. What is very cool here is application publishing will allow you to use shared desktops and applications. But if you have VDI, we can, also create the VDI sessions for the users. So the experience to connect, to use, and for management is the same. It doesn't make any difference. And the way we interact with hypervisors is pretty simple. We talk to the hypervisor's APIs. So we talk to vSphere, we talk to ESX, we talk to Scale, we talk to Nutanix. And when we talk about cloud hypervisors, with Azure, for example, is another option. Now, when you start a deployment, usually in a proof of concept, we have what we call Windows single deployment. It's a virtual machine, right? So that can be an Azure virtual machine or one Windows server. And in this case, the publishing agent, the RD session host, and the gateway roles, which is pretty much Windows services, they are running on the same server. Okay, so now I want to connect to VDI. That's not a problem. You can also using this single install to connect to a VDI infrastructure. And we have customers up to 30 concurrent users and or with or without VDI using this approach. But what is the disadvantage here? They don't have a true failover in this case. So what we do sometimes, you can create another Windows server with all of these roles installed together, use our virtual appliance. If you're using Azure in this case here, or AWS, we use ELBs for that matter. So Azure Load Balancer or AWS ELB to address the load balancing piece. So no extra resource. If you're doing this on-prem, here it's actually a Linux appliance that's actually available. The benefit here is we have now failover. It's a built-in feature. We distribute the load automatically, which in this case, the number of RD session hosts depends on the use case, right? So you can grow your environment as you need, and we can get to the point that you might want to separate the gateways outside or the gateways in a DMZ, so all of the components can be distributed as you wish. So you can start this way. This is a full now high available environment. But this is what large customers usually do. When I talk about large customers, can be 4, 5, 6,000 concurrent connections at the same time, which means here we can start little and scale up our technology or our deployment as needed. So in this particular use case here, the gateways are running on individual virtual machines. Usually they don't need a lot of resources, probably 2 CPUs and 4 to 8 gigabytes of RAM. We have your controllers, and of your controllers, you can have your session host and connect your VDI. In some cases, for added security, we can actually use a DMZ. And in the DMZ, we keep only the Linux level of appliances in place. And in this case, it is inside the DMZ. We have communication ports, and then we interface to communication, right? So either this way or this way, it doesn't really matter. Now, customers have asked us to also think about or deliver the option of what we call multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy, it's covered today pretty well if you have a shared environment for a service provider. But if you want to have farms that are completely installed independently in your data center, and you want to use a single entry point like this, you can have multiple tenants. So they use the URL they have, you can send the traffic through, but here in this case, they are not that segregated. And there's not much of customization in this case. So what we have done as well is you can have, again, complete different RAS deployments in the same data center, different networks, different Active Directories, different SAML identities, and complete different look and feel. You can do that, which we call the full isolation. However, you still have 2 public IP addresses, right? So what we have done on one step next, you have 1 public IP, you share your load balancers and gateways, and then We communicate through the firewalls to talk to the tenant 1 and then to tenant 2. Is there a limitation of tenants? No. You can have like 1 to 1,000 tenants, right? So that's one idea of isolation. And the way users log in RAS, it depends too. You can have direct user interface, we can use MFA, and we have support to SAML, SAML 2.0 to be more specific. And the way we use SAML, it's very easy to implement and use. So the idea using SAML, especially if you are leveraging Azure AD or Okta or ping identifier, using the same rules without enabling local two-factor authentication or so on, right? Although if you don't have SAML, you can still use your MFA with Google Authenticator and so on. But this is very good because if you're using identity providers today, the same rules that you apply there, you log in through there, so you don't have to reset passwords in different environments if you're, service provider, or giving different levels of experience to log on if it's in the same domain level of integration, right? So this is what I wanted to highlight from a slide perspective, and let's now dig into the weeds on how RAS works behind the scenes, and as well how it would work for end users as well. So first, let's cover how end users see RAS. We have what we call the HTML5 client. If you're using other products like Citrix, for example, this is similar to what would be storefront. And the login here is I'm using my domain credentials. And the idea here is, okay, if I don't use SAML, I want to use just SAML and Google Authenticator, we can log into the environment this way. The other option, which I think it's where companies are going more and more, it's using SAML. So instead of that, I can using the SAML logon here. And what it does, we don't log in the RAS login screen. We redirect it to the identity provider, and we can log in with my credentials to my user. So if the company requires me to use two-factor authentication or Google or Microsoft Authenticator or something else, we can do that. So here I am, I'm connected to my environment now. And then based, of course, on filters and my permission level, we can get access to different apps, right? So if I go here to my US demo apps and desktop, we can open different applications. And here it depends on the use case again, right? My demo environment is running on Azure. I can run apps. Let me just say here, let me go to Microsoft Office and let's launch Microsoft Excel. And I also want to launch Microsoft Word. With the right-click option, you can pick to use a native client, which has several different advantages. Or if your users are on the road, they can use HTML5, which is actually pretty good. It allows you to drag and drop files, allows you to do everything what the users need most using a browser. So if I come to my computer and I want to upload a file, for example, I just need to click, drag, move to the screen, and then I can, upload the file, for example. And the process of uploading can happen in foreground or in the background while I'm already working with applications. So let's open the Word document. And based on user policies, which I'll be covering in a little bit, you can allow printing or even the file transfer that I just did. But the most critical feature here is once I want to print this particular document, I can use what we call the printing redirection. So each RD session host has our drivers capture the output, and instead of generating a PDF that you download and print, it's like printing a web page. Pretty much straightforward, easy to use on that sense. The second part of watching here as an end user perspective is VDI. So if and in the VDI case, it really depends on the need. We can use standard Windows 7 or 10 images, or if you have GPU images, you can launch them as well. And we can either give the experience using full client or HTML5 client. So if I launch the Windows 10 without GPU, here I'm launching the client. The client, let me just go back to my main screen here. It's connecting to my demo environment and it's picking for us a image. And in this case, we're identifying what is the best option available. If the VM is powered on or powered off, we will be powering on the VM. So that's what's happening here. And if there's no VDI available, we'll be cloning the image for us in real time. So look, now we have here a black screen, which means the VDI now it's loaded and it's available for us. It's loading my profile. In this case, I'm using FSLogix. And it's completing the image process that will gather my files to this particular desktop. Now, this particular VDI, which is running on Azure on the East Coast of the US, and I'm here in Seattle, Washington, accessing this particular VDI instance. Now, with the desktop loaded, we can open close apps. So we can hide or enable the desktop background. You can see that it's blacked out because that is also, controlled by policies. Remember, if you have any questions that I need to address, please post them in the chat window and we can go from there as well. So let's leave this VDI instance right now that we have it here open. And let's go back to my demo environment here that I have, Google Chrome open. So how do I manage this environment? So using the client, or how you can enroll users in this case, they can detect client and download client and configure that for you. So we detected this is a Mac. You can download and configure. This particular button, configure, it will create the settings directly in the RAS client on the computer, so the user doesn't need to use the HTML5 experience if they don't like it for any reasons. Now let's move to the backend. So this is what we call the Parallels RAS console. And the RAS console talks to the controllers, the publishing agents. And here we have a bird's eye view of what's going on in my Parallels RAS environment. And in this environment here, we have several roles. I have my session hosts. I have my VDI, which is in this case, it's using Azure. I can have remote PCs, which is standalone virtual machines or desktops if you don't want to interface with VDI. The gateways, the controllers, and in this case, I have two controllers, one here in the US and another is a failover in Australia. And for my SAML authentication and handshake, we have the enrollment server, which is integrated with my Active Directory using my NLE user and my specific SSO users. Load balancer, I don't have any, in this case, configured from a RAS point of view, but I'm using Azure Load Balancer. And I have different customizations. One is the default and another one with SAML. And my certificate manager, because I have different environments, I have different certificates to be applied and used. So I mentioned to you, I have a VDI in use. So for session hosts and VDIs, we have what we call sessions, where we can see how many sessions are active right now, and we can manage it. We can disconnect, log off, send message, remote control, or show processes that are running in that particular session. The same happens on my RD session hosts. I have two sessions open, one through SAML and one directly on the server. And here I can come and send a message, for example. And what will happen on the browser session that I have here, the message that I sent out. So communication, pretty straightforward, like maintenance window and so on, can be managed and visualized over here. In the RAS console, it's also easy to manage or understand load balancing rules. So we use a resource-based load balancing where you control how the distribution will happen. And this is how we say limit one session per user. And based on how you set rules, here, for example, in my session host groups or session host itself, how many max sessions per VM you can have. 250 is a little bit exaggerated. Let's say I want to do 20, and how the client will be operating. So we save the settings and they will be propagated. You can also create different groups, and the groups can do two different things. One of them is just a logical association, or you can create a group that can use different settings. And if you're using templates, here I don't have one specific template enabled. Using them, you can do what we call auto scaling. And based on that number 20 that I set up, you can say the environment will be automatically adding new remote desktop session hosts, or they will be decreasing the number of session hosts. So this is more like elastic environment that you can be more dynamic. The benefit on on-premise, it's saving resources. The benefit on Azure is you are shutting down VMs that you don't need, where your billing will be optimized. In VDI, it's very similar. You talk to your providers. So let me show you two different environments very quickly. This is an Azure one, which I'm connecting directly to my Azure environment. And the second one here, I'm connecting to on-premise. So in this case, I have connection to my Hyper-V cluster. And the Hyper-V uses failover cluster if you want. And when you manage your templates, they can be for Windows servers or VDIs. So in the template area here, I have two, so specifically in this case for Windows 7 and Windows 10. And what is very cool, when I manage my templates, you can set them, for example, to have different parameters. Max number of guests. How many you want to keep ready on standby? This is what we call buffer. So if I have one user on, add one right away and be on standby. So you can set the number for that. The naming, how we're going to store it. In this case here, we're selecting where in the storage will be added. How you're preparing. We're using sysprep or rasprep. Rasprep is a more optimized way to have the machines up and running, and this works on Azure as well. Where you want to store in Active Directory these new identities, what license keys will be applied, settings, for example, if you want to automatically remove persistency, or even if the user disconnects, what do you do? Do nothing, shut down, or suspend. So you have different options to do that. And on security, you can set different rules on the Active Directory group of settings. Summary and what you want to do. Now, in the template itself, we can also show guests that are created. Right now, there are no guests created for this particular template. Or you can also set into maintenance mode. And the maintenance mode allows you to create like a staging area or a staging VM while users are working in production. You make all of your edits and you can recreate them. So let's say for some reason we had a ransom attack which compromise those VDIs. User profile saved information, so that doesn't need to be restored. But in 1 or 2 clicks, we can right click and recreate all of the VDIs on the fly, which means we will be talking to the hypervisor and we will be recreating the virtual machines in a matter of minutes. And here you can actually see the status of cloning process if the VMs are being created. This particular process here running on-prem is also valid if we have them running on Azure. So if I right click over here, show guest VMs, I have one, it's connected, the one that I have. Right click over here, recreate them. We'll be destroying the virtual machine, removing from the pool. In a few minutes, we'll see the new templates created. So it usually takes a couple minutes to see that. So now we can see the cloning process in progress. In Azure, it takes more or less 5 to 7 minutes to have that done. All right. So how my resources are published while I'm creating the VDI. First of all, you can create different groups. It can be users, can be locations or rules that you apply for it. And here I have my US demo environment. And in the filtering level, I'm allowing all users, but I'm controlling which gateway users are coming through. So users coming from my Australia endpoint don't see those, and vice versa. When they come from Australia, they don't see US resources. We did this way to keep latency very, very low. So in the filtering, you can combine users and entry points to make sure it's valid for you. And here you can say, for example, let me say sales. I don't have here parallels. Let me find a different group here. Parallel sales. And now the parallel sales group will have access to this app if I restrict them. If I uncheck, all users will have access. This will be propagated automatically to all users or all access points on the way. Under applications, the same thing. You can create your hierarchy view, applications that are enabled or disabled. And for example, I have Mind Manager running here. I can see which servers are running. So I could use server groups like host pools, one server or multiple servers, where the application is running, if they have its own filtering, shortcuts. Do you want them to be automatically created on the desktop of the end user computer? Or if you want to limit, for example, how many max instances of this application will be running. And we have a lot of customers that have legacy apps that they won't load until a printer is mapped. So you can say wait until the printers are mapped. To add new applications, you have the control board here on the bottom. Click on add. You can pick if this is an application, desktop, app V, and so on. So let's say I want to add a new desktop like shared. You can pick which server. So I will use my server pool. I will call it test. How it's going to run. And that will be added to this particular group. If you need to move to different groups, you just drag. You apply these settings. We can come here to the view, refresh, and that will be represented right away to the end users. So that's, again, super simple. When we talk about VDIs, here we can go into my VDIs without GPU, publish the desktop, and the way we define persistence is super, super simple. You just enable the checkbox. And you as an administrator, if you are in this call as an administrator, you go here, you can see let me just refresh the status here. It's still cloning. It's random access. And when it's done, we can show the session or assign it to a specific user. So you can bypass certain definitions if it's required. For iOS users or Android users, using the mobile client. We can create quick keypads. And the quick keypads can be combination of strokes. And this can be like for Excel, for example. And the new shortcut could be I'm using Control Alt 2 to use that. And this combination of keys on the iPad or Android can be super clunky. So what we created is like a new tab that appears on the screen. The user can use that instead. Or all of these assignments can be one stroke or different strokes, can be linked to one or multiple apps. So it's not tied to a specific use case. As I mentioned before, we come with universal printing. You can use different rules. It's enabled to all servers. You can have specific print drivers or fonts if you need them. And in the universal printing drivers, we have different methods to control retention. And one is on the client side, and in this case here is on the server side, which means faster logons and faster user experience to gain access to the applications or desktops. Scanning is also available. We do WIA, which is disabled in this environment, or Twain. And in this case, I have to remind you, today we cover only Windows scanning redirection. Okay, so that's pretty much a very good use case for us. Connection-wise, we support single or multi-domain, so you can use in one domain or multiple domains. You can set settings about retention, or we call it the memory. User disconnects for how long the session can be reconnected or disposed. If you're using multi-factor authentication with multiple providers, there are a few paid ones here like Azure MFA, Duo, and so on. Or you can use Google Authenticator. And using Google Authenticator, for example, let me just enable it very quickly here. The next time we log on, let me log off from SAML, log in, we can use Google Authenticator OTP that you use the app on the phone to authenticate it. So the user here has been used once, and what you can do, because I used it once before, we can just clean up, and what happens is we provide a QR code for the users to authenticate. So let me just go back to the demo environment, log in. We use this QR code with the app, and then once it's scanned, you can use the code. Simple as that. And this image is created, or the QR code, for HTML5, Windows, Linux, and Mac clients. If I want to turn it off, simple, just set it to none, and so on. When we interact with SAML, which was introduced in December 2019, the idea here is you can define to a theme or to a default settings. And the way you interact is using IDPs, how you log in, how you interact with the certificates in both ends, attributes for authentication to do the handshake. This process to set up, fairly simple. Takes less than 10 minutes if you have the identity provider already set up, RAS installed to have that connected. So it's actually pretty simple. Policies to control users is very important because here we control pretty much all of our clients. If you want to do that, you can define how connections work. If you allow users to save passwords and use a very important feature, we call it session pre-launch. Session pre-launch learns how the end users log in every day. And if they have like a Windows client, the computer is on. When the user comes to work, you pre-log on the user and have the session or application ready. Two advantages here. It works with auto scaling and avoids login storms in the morning. Okay, so that's a very good feature there. You can control, different things related to display settings, how, browser will be opening, same tab, new tab. This is especially when we work to HTML5 experience. If we're going to control devices redirection, right now it's turned off. But if you want to allow clipboard, disk drive, devices like USB devices, port, smart card, and of course, performance, users performance. What profile you want to use, we can use auto detection or use a specific profile to assign the best performance for user. Remember, I didn't have a background loaded when I opened the RAS session because desktop background was turned off. And here in advanced settings, we can control, for example, if you're using high definition displays, or if you want to enable extended log automatically, if you need to, need to do some troubleshooting and so on. And of course, you can do control settings to avoid users to create new connections or adding standalone connections, saving or changing passwords, and so on. The way the policy works is also simple. It is based on user or groups that you define to your criteria. So here I called for all users and I had all domain users. So you can create new policies based on different departments or specific user groups. In the administration area, we have different admins or groups that you can add. You can control features like the help desk to auto, get notifications, settings, like if you want to back up your environment, notifications for mailbox, reporting, and we call it audit here. It's pretty much the ability for you to know what changed and you can reverse it back. And related to the admin side, we have something very important here in the global settings. We have the ability to control or give you notifications. So in case there are events of too much CPU utilization, too many log offs, or tenant events, VDI events, either take an action or run a script. So you can either, be more proactive on that end. And that leads to our monitoring tool. You can see in real time what's happening in terms of sessions, gateway traffic, network usage, and so on. And from a historic point of view, we have a built-in reporting tool that you can run reports based on users or apps, VDIs, and so on. So this is connecting to a SQL server, which is not mandatory in RAS, but it's needed for reporting. And for example, we can run here user activity. Let's go to full user information. And the report will be showing you the last 7 days. So I can see that Brian connected here a few times. Use mainly these are background apps. Use a publish app called My Manager. How many times My Manager was launched? Use in a week for once. So let me just change to my user, for example. In the last week, I saw several sessions by my user. What applications I used. Those reports can be printed. You can export them. And on the user activity, here is just a summary of all of the reports. And instead of just showing the last week, let's look the last couple months. So we retrieved the report as well. You can see it's pretty fast. How many sessions were open per user. Now in RAS, this is pretty much how you manage, but I mentioned to you that we have also the feature of multi-tenancy. So let's go back to the browser one more time. And in the multi-tenancy here, I already pre-opened 2 pages, tenant 2 and tenant 1. Those environments are separated in different VMs. So if I log into tenant, let me go first to tenant 1. I'll use my user. In this case, we have Google Authenticator open. If I go to my second environment, well, it's the same user ID, but different AD credentials, it doesn't have. And the way we have here is we have a multi-tenant, we call it multi-tenant broker. And from the multi-tenant broker, we can create the trusts. And the way that it's done, if you go here to my farm, I come here to my site, I have a tenant broker, and to assign it, I can join or unjoin. So let me connect very quickly to my tenant broker virtual machine. So again, it's an independent virtual machine to acting as a broker, which can have its own gateway or multiple gateways. Let's minimize this window over here. Let's go to Parallels RAS console. And here we can see it's a much more simplified view compared to what we have here on the left. But I can see that I have tenants, tenant number 1, tenant number 2. And opening the tenants, I can see it has an invitation, which is we call it a hash, that you can copy and use. So the process to add it, you just copy, join, and then it's a done process. No certificates, no complicated process to do that. All right, so let's go back here to the RAS console and look into one more thing that is very important. When we deal with gateways, the way we operate gateways, in this case, lab has only one. And if I look into my other environment here, I can have 3 or as many as you need. So the license doesn't control the number of gateways or servers that you use. And what is very cool here is in the gateway settings, you can define certain rules. One of them, it's how it's running. So in most cases, it's running now in normal mode, but legacy customers sometimes has what we call the forwarding mode. You can enable just for redirection the port 80. Have DDoS attack filter, and we route all of the traffic to use secure traffic using a specific certificate, TLS level. If you want to use HTML5 or not, and if you're using a specific redirection, and for Azure Load Balancer and or AWS, or if you're using F5 or different load balancers, what is the web cookie methodology used? Okay, we're using ASP.NET in this case with session ID passed, so things can work much smoother way. Now, what is very cool here too, in the certificate area, it's where you can import the certificates. So I can see what is going to expire soon. Like in February, this one already expired. It can be used for gateways or load balancers. And the process to add them is very simple. You can import the certificate. We load the file using PFX. So if you have a PFX file, very easy to have them incorporated here. So it's a very, straightforward. And to customize the look and feel of the gateway HTML5 experience, it's also done online. No need to know color code, hex codes or anything like it. You can just go to your theme. You can play around URLs if you have customized Windows client. And on branding, look, I changed the color here to black. And in the colors, you can say what you want to do. So you can change the logo, for example, to your company logo. You can change colors. So double click on the background. It can be black, and be, this shade of red, can be green, can be any color that you design. You can set also alert text. And when the user password is about to expire, we put them on the header and we use, for example, this particular color. Messages. Do you want to send a message before a user login or after they log in? Language. This environment is only enabled in English, but you can set different languages if it's needed. And in the gateway settings, you can have overridden settings just for this particular theme or tenant. And once I make all of these changes, you don't have to click save. You can preview. This is exactly how it's going to look like. And that's part of the customization that can be done in the HTML5. So if I click OK, and then we can do the Windows client branding as well. Banner, messages, and custom menu options that you can add. All right, so this pretty much covers what I wanted to do in this deep dive today. If you want to have a proof of concept, you can contact our sales team. And now let's address questions. Okay, so let me give a couple minutes here to the audience to see if there are any questions in our panel. And if there's no questions, I would like to thank you for your time. So let's give a minute or two here, and we'll be listening for questions. All right, looks like we don't have any questions for today's session. So again, thank you again for your time, and we will be sharing this recorded session if needed. And again, please contact our sales team if you want to go deeper in a proof of concept, test your scenarios, and work with us. All right, so thank you so much for your time and have a great day.